Hwei is coming to PBE very shortly. Thanks to Riot, I can show you Hwei today, his abilities and his gameplay. Fasten your seatbelts, because Hwei is the first League of Legends champion that has access to 10 unique spells. Yes, you heard it right, he has 10 abilities instead of 4, but more on that very soon. So Hwei is a mid lane ink mage. He is a painter and uses his brush as a tool to cast his abilities. He is an AP champion with access to multiple area of effects abilities, he has great range, and he excels both as a poke mage and as a burst mage. He is great in teamfighting and controlling objectives, and does a lot of AP damage if played properly. Now I'm gonna show you all 10 of his abilities, and after that I'm gonna tell you more about his strengths and weaknesses, playstyles, runes and some others. So Hwei is circled around 3 subjects. One is assigned to his Q, one to his W and one to his E. Q subject is called Disaster, W subject is called Serenity, and E subject is Torment. Each subject has 3 spells available within them. Hwei spells therefore are QQ, QW, QE, WQ, WW, WE, EQ, EW, EE, and finally his ult. Imagine those Q, W and E subjects as separate spellbooks. When you cast a spell from a certain spellbook, let's say QQ in this example, all the other spells in that spellbook go on cooldown. So when you cast QQ, you cannot cast QW or QE anymore. You have to wait off the cooldown first. So while you have the access to 9 different abilities, in reality you have 3 shared cooldowns for them. That's why it's very important to decide which ability you wanna cast, because if you cast it, you are not gonna get the other 2 soon. Let's quickly start with passive. Hwei's passive is called Signature of the Visionary. Hwei's damaging abilities against enemy champions mark them for a few seconds. Hitting marked enemies with another damaging ability creates an explosion underneath them, detonating after a short delay and dealing magic damage to all enemies in range. So we already know he's all about AoE. Now let's start with the first subject, Q, which is Disaster. This subject is all about damage. QQ, called Devastating Fire, it's a fast moving fireball that explodes on the first enemy hit or at maximum range. It does magic damage and percentage max health magic damage to all enemies in the area. QW, called Severing Bolt, it's a long range artillery spell, less reliable than QQ. It casts a bolt at the target location and explodes after a delay. It does more damage to immobilized or isolated enemies based on missing health. It's a similar execute to Hwei R in this regard. QE, called Molten Fissure, it's a long line of exploding area zones. It does damage initially on hit and also does damage over time. Enemies in this field are also slowed. Now it's time for Hwei W. This subject is called Serenity and it's all about sustain, utility and controlling battle. WQ, called Fleeting Current, paints a current of water in a line for a few seconds. This ability grants movement speed boost for him and his allies. WW, called Pool of Reflection, forms a stationary pool at the location that lasts for a few seconds. It provides immediate shield, but also shield over time. Half of the shield power applies to allies up front, and the other half happens over time, so staying in it equals more shields. WE is called Stirring Lights, and it creates free buffs that circle around him for a few seconds. It empowers free attacks or spells to do bonus magic damage and restores a lot of mana. If you spend all of your charges, you will have more mana than before casting W, so you can use this for mana restoration. Especially important because Hwei is a very mana hungry champion. And finally, Hwei E. E subject is called Torment. It has a terror theme and it's all about crowd control. EQ, called Grim Visage, it is a skill shot that strikes the first enemy hit and causes them to flee, and also does magic damage. EW, called Gaze of the Abyss, paints an eye at the location and after short delay it fires at the locked on champion, rooting the first enemy in its path for a few seconds and dealing magic damage. This root supposedly has a long duration. And this ability also provides vision, so it can be used for brush checking. EE, called Crushing Maul, it pulls multiple enemies towards the center while dealing damage. It also slows enemies. If you press your Q, W or E ability but you decide not to cast it anymore, you can cancel it with your R. Let's say you press Q, then to cancel it just press R. This ability cancel is called Wash Brush. You can use this strategy to bait your enemies. You don't lose any mana or cooldown in the process. Speaking of R, Hwei ultimate is called Spiraling Despair. It fires a vision of pure despair that attaches to an enemy champion for a few seconds. It does damage over time and grows over time. Enemies inside the zone are afflicted with stacks of despair that increase over time. Each stack of despair applies a stacking percent slow. Once the spell ends, it explodes, dealing AoE damage to everyone inside. It will also explode early if the champion that was hit with it dies. Now let's talk a little bit more about Hwei gameplay. For runes, you most likely wanna go typical mage keystones like Arcane Comet, First Strike or Dark Harvest. For skill order, you want to max your Q first and then most likely follow it up by E and then level up your W last. W is all about utility, so it's particularly useful in the teamfighting in the later parts of the game. Hwei scaling is pretty powerful with both gold and experience. Hwei is strongest in mid to late game. He's not a true hyperscaler with infinite scaling, those are likely to outscale him. He's also rather fragile and vulnerable, especially in the early game, so if you want to punish him, pressuring him early game is a very good idea. After all, he doesn't have any gap closer. For items, you want to focus on a mix of AP and ability haste items, so the classic items for mages. So you already know that Hwei can be played mid, but what about the other roles? Well, Riot intends Hwei to be playable as a support. This is his secondary role. There is also a chance that he will be viable to play as an AP carry in the bot lane. That being said, it's primarily a champion for mid lane. If Hwei is gonna be too OP as a support, Riot is most likely going to nerf him just there. They want to have Hwei as a mid laner. That's basically their message. So yeah, that's it from me. You can now enjoy some more Hwei gameplay with music. Cheers!